What's up guys, I'm Mr. Audio, and if you're new to the channel, welcome. This video is going to be the first video in a two-part mini-series, Drums Processing in Ableton. Now the reason I'm making this video is because I got a very well-worded email asking me to touch on the subject. In this mini-series, I'm going to go over program drums, or MIDI drums. Pretty much anything you're using samples for. Now, I'll be doing another mini-series eventually in the future where I process mic drums. And I'm sure that series will go as in-depth as this series does. So in this video, we're going to go over the kick and the snare pretty in-depth, and I don't want the video to be too long, so I'm going to cut it short after that, and we're going to make the second part the rest of the drum kit. All right? But you're going to want to watch to the end because I do have some insights on panning and different ways you can make your drum set sound symmetrical without sacrificing drummer's perspective or audience perspective. So stick around for the end for that. But let's process this kick and snare. So in my template, I have a bunch of samples and instruments all loaded up, ready to use. So if I want to write into my DAW, I totally can do that. I don't necessarily prefer to do that. I prefer to have a good idea going into the production and then kind of create the production around the idea. But sometimes it's good to get ideas. And that's how this production kind of turned out. I didn't really have an idea. I was just kind of making an instrumental and then it turned into something miraculous. So let's check out this placeholder kick originally. And it originally started off as like a hip hop kick from Cymatics. Now if you notice, I've got this track selected right here and soloed out. As you can see, not much life there. We need to do a ton of work to make this kick translate on all systems as well as sit right in the mix. So let's just talk about layering kicks first here for a second because you want to watch the phase relationship. Now I made a few videos in the past that are relevant to the subject. I'll link them down in the description. Feel free to give them a watch. They're definitely worth it. Anyway, so phase relationship refers to the waveform. All right, so you have to think of your stereo image and your frequency spectrum as two separate places, okay? Because technically they are. You can have two elements sit in the same space on the frequency spectrum, and they would normally be conflicting with each other, but with some clever panning to the sides, they don't conflict. So, that being said, with that knowledge, those are two separate places. Knowing that, we can move on to what a phase relationship is. Now, what is a phase relationship? Well, first of all, it has to do with the waveform. Let's take a look. All right, so we're going to zoom in right here. As you can see, there's this flat line right here where no audio is being played. All right, that flat line means the speaker is doing nothing. All right, so when the waveform moves above that center line, it tells the speaker to move forward. And when it goes below that line, it tells the speaker to move backwards. Going above and below the center line is called one cycle. Now, the faster these cycles happen, or the more frequent these cycles are happening, the higher frequency sound is reproduced. I know, it's kind of ironic. The more frequent the cycles are, the higher the frequency produced. But that's just how it is, okay? So knowing that, we can assume that the faster the cycles are, the higher frequency that sound is. I'm going to do something to this kick now. So, I took this kick, and I duplicated it 3 times. Because it's in MIDI form and in a sampler, I can pitch them up and pitch them down with ease. So on those 3 copies, I'm going to take the first one, and as you can see here, we'll go to controls, and it's pitched 12 semitones up. Now I'm going to pitch the second duplicate 24 semitones up, and the third 36, all right? Now, what this is doing is it's spanning that kick over 4 octaves, putting the kick in 4 separate places on the frequency spectrum. Now, they're all still in the same spot in the stereo image, but they're now not conflicting with each other. All right, now let me show you why. So, I've taken all of these kicks here, and I've frozen flattened a portion of them to put them right here in order. This is our original, and these are our other 3 duplicates right here. And this is a kick that I wanted to layer in for some sub-energy. And we'll get to that in a minute. You'll notice that this peak meets this valley. Normally, that would cause a phase cancellation and cause this kick to be weaker. But because it's not in the same spot in the frequency spectrum, it's not causing a phase cancellation. It's adding some top-end character. Now let's listen to what each one of these sounds like on their own. Here's the original. Now here's the first duplicate. See, it adds a little bit more top end, a little bit more thump, and some body. Now here's the second duplicate. As you can see, it adds some clickiness, some more transient information to the kick. That's going to help translate on all systems better. And now here's the third and final duplicate. And as you can see, that is extremely clicky and all transient oriented. But let's see what all these 4 kicks sound like together, and then we'll get to the 5th sub-energy kick that I added in. Also, you're going to want to blend them to taste like I've done here. Let's look. See how I kind of blended all 3 of these kicks in with this original kick to give it its own sound? And I left these 2 kicks at unity. So now all 4 of these kicks sound like this. I'm going to put it on a loop so you can get a good idea of what it sounds like. Let it sink in a bit. And as you can see, now it's starting to actually sound like a kick that you'd hear in a rock song. But we're still missing some sub-energy and some top end, but we'll get to that. Now let's look at this 5th kick that I added in here. So this 5th kick is right here. Kind of pillowy if you ask me. On its own, it might work for like a lo-fi hip-hop beat, but not for a high-energy rock song. All I want this to do is add some low-end energy to it because I feel like we're just missing some sub. Now all 5 of these kicks sound like this together. Now we're going to take a look at what's happening on the frequency spectrum. Let's grab an EQ. You'll notice I put some points on this EQ already. And so here's our 5th sub-energy kick that I've added in. Its fundamentals around 83 hertz. The other kicks are around 62, 120, 220 something, and 500. As you can see, the frequency doubles every time you move up an octave. If your original kick fundamental is at 62 hertz and you pitch it up an octave, now your fundamental is at 124 hertz. It doubles every single time. Okay, so now we get to the important part when layering your kicks with more beefy kicks. All right, you want to make sure the phase relationship of these 2 line up. Otherwise, it's going to cause a phase cancellation. Now, a phase cancellation will make your sound weaker than it otherwise would have been had you not added that in. Why? Well, first of all, you have one sound telling the speaker to move forward and another sound with a valley telling the speaker to move backwards. It's going to reproduce a sound with a value of the difference of those 2 values. All right, so let's just put a number on it for a second. If one sound tells the speaker to move forward 1 dB and another sound tells it to move backwards 0.3 dB, it's going to reproduce a sound with a value of 0.7 dB. This is something you should definitely watch out for. Let's just take a look at what I mean here. All right, so as you can see here, most of this lines up here. This peak lines up with this peak, and this valley lines up with this valley. This peak lines up, this valley lines up. Same here. We get a little wishy-washy towards the end here, but the kick is pretty much done, and we've lost a lot of the energy anyways. So we can let that be. Now, I went over this in another video and actually showed what it was doing to the waveform. Give it a watch. It's called Your Kicks Suck. It's linked down in the description along with some other videos that are relevant to this topic as well. Phase cancellations are definitely something you need to watch out for in kicks. It's also very important for your drum sound anyways to make sure that all of the drums that are hitting at the exact same time are telling the speaker to move forward, and none of them are telling the speaker to move backwards, because it's going to be conflicting to the speaker and you're going to get a weaker sound. That's why they put those phase invert buttons on consoles, so they can mic up live drums and get a really punchy sound for the audience. Okay, but we're not done there. Now, why did I print all of those to audio? Well, I'm going to need to print all of my drums to audio to make sure that the waveforms are all telling the speaker to move forward, like I mentioned a minute ago. So I printed it to audio, and then I used an EQ to boost some lows and some high mids. Let's check it out. All right, so here's this. I have it selected, and you can listen to it here. Now let's check out this EQ here. As you can see, I'm boosting the lows pretty significantly at 67 hertz, and around 1.7 kilohertz, I'm boosting pretty significantly as well, to get more of a transient sound and more of a click. This will translate on all systems a bit better. Let's listen to it now. Now, if you notice, we haven't used any plugins but an EQ so far, and I don't even think I need to compress this sound. It sounds great as is. Let's just check out if I can match this with Ableton's EQ8. I took an EQ8, put it on the same frequencies, boosted the gain, and messed with the Q a bit to get it to fit right and sound pretty much identical. So I'm going to start off playing the one where I used Isotope's EQ, and then I'm going to switch in the middle to Ableton's. I'll note when I do. Now I'm switching to Ableton. As you can see, nearly identical. I'm sure if I played around with this in a plugin analyzer, I could probably get an accurate null. But that's not the purpose of this video. we're just processing drums today. Now let's move on to the snare. All right, so now that we've gone over the kick, I want to show you a snare from another production because I processed it using all Ableton stock plugins, and I wanted to show that you can still get that really thick, beefy rock snare using Ableton stock plugins, or rather any stock plugins. Let's check it out. Okay, so in this production, the snare starts out like this. As you can see, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's just a bit too much high-end attack. There's no beef. It sounds like we need to boost the fundamental, if you know what I mean. So first thing I did, before I added any EQ, I wanted to add some New York style compression, or rather parallel compression. All right, so we're going to look at that now. This is a auto gain compensator, well, to the best of my abilities, glue compressor from Ableton. Like I can show you here. It's just a glue compressor with controls mapped right here and here. This is what that adds to the sound. Here's without. Here's with. See, it still sounds very similar, but it adds that fatness that we need, all right? Now we're going to bring it into an EQ. Okay, so I'm going to turn this EQ on. I'm scooping some high mids here, boosting some highs with the high shelved, and then boosting the fundamental quite severely. As you can see here, it's like 8 dB. And already we're starting to get that thick, beefy snare sound. But it didn't sit quite right in the mix, and we're still not done. We still have to go through a couple more processes to make this snare sound like a fully processed snare. That being said, I added another EQ for it to sit right in the mix. Here's with that off. Just adds a bit more fatness. Here, listen again. Here's with it off. Now I'm going to add it back in now. See how it just adds a little bit of fatness to it? That's going to matter in the end. So then I added this limiter here just to drive the audio into it and accent the top end and get it sounding a little bit more fat with a little bit more crunch. And that's what this sounds like. And as you can see, we're so close to getting the snare sound we actually want. Then I took that and I froze that. Being that this is all Ableton stock plugins, it's going to freeze really quick. So I'm going to select all the MIDI tracks in the frozen track, and then I'm going to drag them down to the track below it, like this. I'm going to turn it on Complex Pro, just because I'm superstitious. I don't honestly think it's going to do anything unless you actually stretch or warp the audio, but because I'm superstitious, I do that. All right, let's raise this 1.56 like I did in the previous one. And I'm pushing the audio into this glue compressor with soft clip on with no threshold so that it just chops off the top of the peaks. So we're driving the peaks above 0 so that it just kind of crops it off. It's going to add a little bit of color, but we kind of want that. So then I'm going to freeze this audio here. Remember, it's all about the waveform and how it looks and how it's going to sit in the mix. A lot of how it sits in the mix has to do with the waveform. And like I said, Ableton stock plugins, very quickly to freeze. Then I'm going to take that audio and I'm going to drag it down again. Select all of the audio clips, turn Complex Pro on, and then minusing 0.5 dB just so it's not clipping. And then we get this. I boosted a little top end here. So here's where we started, and then I'll toggle on where we ended up in the middle of it. So like I said, here's where we started. Now we're ready to send some audio to some reverb. Now drums are very particular. When a drummer strikes a drum head, they don't always strike it with the same velocity. All right? If they did, they might as well be robots. But what that does to the drum sound is it gives off a slightly different pitch every single time, but just a couple of cents. Yes, the drum heads are tuned to the best of its ability, but just like a guitar, when you pluck the string, it goes out of tune just a little bit and then hovers in tune. All right? So that's what the drum is doing when you hit it. So you're trying to hit it with the same velocity every time, but it's not always the case. So to make your drums sound more natural, it would be wise to take like an 8-bar loop or a section and pitch a couple of them up a couple of cents and pitch a couple of the hits down a couple of cents. Now, I've got a solve for if you have your production already done and you want a quick fix for this. What also doesn't trigger the same every single time? A flanger. What you can do is you can send your audio from the snare to a reverb and then put a flanger at the end of that to kind of trigger some interesting snare effects that'll be triggered different every single time. Let's do that now. So as you can see here, I have a snare room reverb from Ableton, and I built an effect rack right here where I'm at minus 6 dB here on this chain, which is just a dry chain, and I'm at negative 13.7 dB right here. And I've got it on 100%, and I've got the flanger settings like this. It took me a little bit to mess with these settings to get it to sound like I wanted it to, but rest assured, if you mess with it enough, you'll get it sounding the way you like it, and just a little bit of flange on the reverb from the snare is all you need. And make sure you're only sending the snare to this reverb. It's a special reverb, all right? So I'm going to turn the flanger effect rack off, and we're going to listen to just the snare with the reverb. And then I'm going to turn the flanger back on, and I'll note when I do that. All right, so here's just the reverb with the snare. It sounds good, but let's hear it with the flanger. This is with just the reverb. Now with the flanger. As you can see, it adds a little stereo spread, life, and color to that snare, and it helps it sit right in the mix. Here, let's give it a listen.
We don't talk about the things you said when you were drunk last night. What's the point of that? And we don't talk about the things you did when you were drunk last night. There is no point in that.
But just some food for thought and some bonus tips if you've made it this far in the video. So, let's go over a few things, all right? Heavily compressing something in parallel is pretty much the same as heavily limiting something in parallel. You can use a parallel limiter to do the same job as New York style compression. It's just a little bit more top-end wispy. I like to use it on cymbals, per se. And there's a video I'll link down below where you can try it out yourself, and I'll show you how I do it. Going on that topic of cymbals, I do some panning with my cymbals, all right? I don't keep everything in the center. Personally, I like drummer's perspective, and if I'm thinking a drummer's perspective, and I've played a little bit of the drums, not a lot, mind you, but a little. And when I'm playing the drums, they're surrounding me. You know what I mean? So if I play a tom, it's going to ring in my left ear more than the right. If I play a tom over here, it's going to ring in my right ear more than the left. Same thing with this crash cymbal here, or this crash cymbal here, or this ride cymbal right here. It's going to be slightly off, all right? Now the snare's always going to be in the center because you're straddling it, all right? Your floor tom's always going to feel like it's far away or maybe even a little bit behind you, which that's okay. Drummer's perspective is a drastic move, and most rock songs have that drastic move. Some don't. Some have what I consider to be audience perspective, which to me isn't just the reverse of drummer's perspective. It's not only the reverse, it's also the perspective of the audience. So if you're a drummer and you're on stage, you're far away from the audience. The perception of stereo spread is much narrower than you think. So your cymbals, we pan just a little off center, toms just a little off center. And so everything has a stereo spread, but it's still very mono-compatible. This is the case with some rock songs. In some rock songs, it sounds like the toms are in another freaking room, they're so wide. You know what I mean? Like, it depends on what the production calls for. But personally, for drum arrangement, I choose drummer's perspective because I like the way it's laid out. I like toms going from left to right, you know, high to low, left to right. And for cymbals, I like my main crash here, my ride here, my other crash here, my hi-hats here. All right? It's a pretty standard drummer's perspective drum setup. But if I'm going to do audience perspective, all I do is just tame down my panning a little bit. Sometimes panning the cymbal off makes it sound kind of lopsided and uneven. So I'll make a reverb for that cymbal specifically, pan it exactly the opposite amount the other way, and then push audio to that send until I hear a satisfying sound in both ears, but it's still right ear dominant. Now, the trick is to add the pre-delay long enough so it sounds like an echo on the left ear. That's the secret sauce. Anyway, moving on to the toms, all right? Toms are very transient oriented and they're very big and boomy, and you kind of want to trim up the tails of them. You want them to sit in the mix right and not interfere with all of the other instruments unless it's like a very tom heavy performance. But then you're still going to want shorter tails so they don't bleed into each other and make it a muddy sound. So be careful with toms, all right? Anyway, This is all for program drums. Again, I'll be going over mic'd drums in a completely different video series, all right? But if you stuck around at the end and you're an Ableton user, you know the drill. I got some free Ableton racks with links in the description, as well as all those other videos I mentioned previously. Now, I have some updates coming on the Vocal Sauce Rack and the Vocal Production Suite. They'll be up soon with videos as well. All right? Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Mr. Audio, out.